The glass elevator descended like Alice Chen's entire world, collapsing floor by floor. 24 stories of regret, each one marked by the gentle chime that seemed to mock her surrender. Quick pause, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. If this story has you hooked, hit like and subscribe, because what's coming next is even more intense. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, watching the Singapore skyline blur through tears she refused to acknowledge as her own. How did it come to this? 3 hours ago, Alice had walked into that obsidian tower with her head held high, determined to negotiate terms that would save Chen and Associates, the architectural firm her mother had founded and her father had poured his life into. She'd prepared for a business meeting, armed herself with counteroffers and contingencies, convinced she could outmaneuver David Ashford at his own game. She'd been spectacularly wrong. The contract crinkled in her trembling hands, a marriage certificate disguised as a merger agreement. 6 weeks from now, she would stand in front of witnesses and promise forever to a man who looked at her like she was nothing more than square footage to be acquired. Alice Chen, junior architect, dreamer of sustainable housing and community-centered design, reduced to a line item on David Ashford's balance sheet. The elevator doors opened to street level, and humid evening air rushed in, carrying the scent of rain and street food from the hawker stalls nearby. Alice stepped out onto the marble floor, her heels clicking with a finality that made her stomach turn. She glanced back up at the building, Ashford Tower, naturally, its dark glass surface reflecting nothing but the dying light. Somewhere up there, probably in that corner office on the 72nd floor, David was already moving pieces on his chessboard, planning his next acquisition. The merger documents sat on his desk, beside a tumbler of whiskey he'd sipped exactly twice during their entire negotiation. He'd been that calm, that controlled, while systematically dismantling every objection she'd raised. "Your father's firm has something I need," he'd said, his voice devoid of inflection. "Legacy, reputation, community trust. These things can't be bought, not directly. But a marriage alliance solves both our problems efficiently." "I'm not a problem to be solved," Alice had managed, finding her voice despite the shock that threatened to paralyze her. David had leaned back in his leather chair, those ice blue eyes finally settling on her with an intensity that made her breath catch involuntarily. "No," he'd agreed, and something flickered across his face, too quick to identify, too dangerous to hope it meant anything. "You're an opportunity one don't intend to waste." Now, standing on the street as crowds flowed around her like water around a stone, Alice replayed those words. An opportunity. Not a partner. Not even a person, really. Just another calculated move in whatever ruthless game David Ashford had been playing since he'd started circling her father's firm like a shark scenting blood. Her phone buzzed. Michelle. Her best friend had called 6 times during the meeting, each call declined with increasing guilt. Alice couldn't face her yet, couldn't hear the disappointment she knew would flood Michelle's voice when she learned what Alice had agreed to. Instead, she started walking, letting muscle memory guide her through familiar streets toward the one place that had always made sense, her mother's community center, the last project Maya Chen had designed before cancer had stolen her away. The building stood 3 blocks from Ashford Tower, a deliberate middle finger to the glass and steel monuments David preferred. Warm wood, green walls, spaces designed for gathering and connection rather than profit and isolation. Alice had spent months after her mother's death volunteering there, teaching kids basic design principles, helping elderly residents plan vegetable gardens on the rooftop. It was supposed to be the first of many, Maya Chen's legacy of architecture that served people, not developers. Then the medical bills had come due. Then her father had missed 3 mortgage payments. Then David Ashford had started buying up every property surrounding Chen and Associates' historic building, systematically cutting off their access to clients and contracts until they had nowhere left to turn. Marry him, or watch generations of work crumble into foreclosure. Some choice. Alice reached the community center just as the evening classes were letting out. Children's laughter spilled through the open doors, and she stood outside, watching through windows her mother had positioned to maximize natural light. A group of teenagers worked on architectural models, probably for the youth design competition Alice had helped organize last spring, back when she still believed good intentions could triumph over market forces. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Alice turned to find Maria, named after her mother, though everyone called her Mari, standing in the doorway. The center's director was in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that missed nothing. "Mari." Alice's voice cracked. "I need to tell you something." They sat on the bench her mother had designed, positioned to catch the last rays of sunlight. Alice explained everything: the debt, the acquisition attempts, David's proposal, her agreement. With each word, she watched Mari's expression shift from concern to horror to something that looked disturbingly like resignation. "I knew this was coming," Mari said quietly. "Not the marriage part, that's a new level of calculated cruelty even for an Ashford. But I knew he'd find a way to take everything your mother built." "You know him?" "I know of him. Everyone in development does. David Ashford doesn't just build empires, he destroys them first, salts the earth, then constructs something profitable from the ashes." Mari took Alice's hand. 3 previous wives, Alice. Did you know that? Each one the daughter of a man he targeted for acquisition. Each marriage lasting exactly 18 months before a quiet divorce and complete absorption of their family's companies. The number hit Alice like a physical blow. 18 months. You're number 4. And unless something changes, you'll end up like the others, discarded the moment you've served your purpose, watching while he dismantles everything you tried to save. Alice stared at the community center, at the children inside learning to dream in wood and glass and sustainable design. "Then I have 18 months to figure out how to beat him at his own game." Mari smiled sadly. "Or you could run." "There's no shame in choosing yourself, Alice." But there was. Alice knew her father couldn't survive watching another thing he loved be destroyed. The firm was all he had left of his wife, and Alice was all he had left of his family. She couldn't take that from him, no matter what it cost her. "I made a promise," Alice said, standing. The contract felt heavier now, weighted with the knowledge of those who'd come before her. "I'm seeing this through." As she walked home through streets that suddenly felt like a cage, Alice made herself a different promise. She wouldn't be like the others. She wouldn't be passive, waiting to be discarded. If David Ashford wanted to own her, he'd find that she was a far more expensive acquisition than he'd calculated. She'd play his game. And somehow, she'd find a way to win. Paul Chen's hands trembled as he reviewed the merger documents for what must have been the 100th time. His reading glasses sat crooked on his nose, and Alice noticed new lines carved around his mouth that hadn't been there a month ago. Her father had aged a decade since her mother's death, grief and financial ruin grinding him down like sandpaper on fine wood. "It's a good deal, Alice," he said, but he couldn't meet her eyes. His gaze stayed fixed on the papers, as if the legal language could somehow absolve him of what he was asking her to do. "The firm survives. Your mother's memory, everything we built together, it all stays intact." Everything except me, Alice thought, but didn't say. She stood by the window of her father's study, the same window where she'd done homework as a child while he and her mother had debated design philosophy late into the night. This room had been their sanctuary, filled with architectural models and sketches, the walls covered with photos from completed projects, schools, community centers, affordable housing developments. Work that mattered. Work that helped people. Now it was a crime scene, evidence of their desperation scattered across every surface. "Dad." Alice turned from the window. "You don't have to do this. We could file for bankruptcy, start over." At 63? Paul finally looked up, and the defeat in his eyes made Alice's chest ache. "With what capital? What reputation? Your mother spent 30 years building this firm into something that meant something, Alice. I can't let it die because I was too proud or too stubborn to make a hard choice. This isn't a hard choice. It's an impossible one. You're asking me to marry a man who's systematically destroyed everything that stood in his way. I'm asking you to save what your mother loved." The words hung between them like smoke. Alice wanted to rage, to throw something, to make him see that this wasn't salvation, it was surrender. But she looked at her father's trembling hands and remembered how those same hands had held her mother's as cancer ate away at her, promising to protect their legacy, to make sure Maya Chen's vision lived on. How could Alice take that promise away from him? "Tell me about him," she said instead, sinking into the leather chair across from her father's desk. "Tell me about David Ashford." Paul removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I met him exactly twice before this arrangement. The first time was 5 years ago at a city planning meeting. Your mother had proposed that community center in Taiyangbaru, the one that's standing now. David showed up with plans for luxury condos on the same site. I watched him dismantle every argument we made. He was brilliant, Alice. Methodical. He pulled apart our proposal like it was faulty scaffolding, showed the council exactly why profitability mattered more than principle. But Mom's project got approved. Because she fought like hell. She found alternative funding, proving the community center would increase property values in ways his condos couldn't. She beat him, Alice. She's one of the few people who ever did." Paul's expression softened with memory. "I think he respected her for it. Strange as that sounds." Alice filed that information away. If her mother had found a way to outmaneuver David Ashford once, maybe the same vulnerabilities still existed. And the second time? Paul's face clouded. 3 weeks after the funeral. "We were drowning in medical debt. Your mother's insurance had denied so many treatments, and I'd mortgaged everything to pay for them anyway. I couldn't focus on work, clients were leaving, and we'd missed 2 major project deadlines. I was sitting in this office, trying to figure out which creditor to pay first, when he just appeared. Appeared? His assistant called, said Mr. Ashford wanted to meet. I assumed he was going to make an offer on the building. He'd already bought up the properties on 3 sides of us. But he walked in here, sat exactly where you're sitting, and laid out his proposal like he was ordering coffee from a hawker stall." Alice tried to imagine it, David Ashford in this warm, cluttered space, his cold precision cutting through her father's grief like a scalpel. "What did he say?" "That your mother's firm had something he needed. Legacy. Reputation. Community trust. That these things couldn't be bought directly, but a marriage alliance would solve both our problems efficiently. He had capital and connections. We had credibility and community relationships. Together, we could build something neither of us could achieve alone." "And you believed him?" "I was desperate, Alice. I still am. He showed me his plans, proposed projects that align with your mother's vision. Sustainable housing, community spaces, mixed-use developments that actually serve residents instead of displacing them. On paper, it looked like everything we'd ever wanted to build." "On paper," Alice repeated. "What about in reality?" Paul slumped in his chair. "I don't know. That's the honest truth. David Ashford is either the answer to our prayers or the devil in a tailored suit, and I've sold you to him without knowing which." The admission hung heavy in the air. Alice wanted to be angry, but she could only feel a bone-deep weariness. This was the situation they were in, no good choices, only varying degrees of terrible. "I researched him," Alice said quietly. "After our meeting. Did you know about the other wives?" Paul's silence was answered enough. 3 previous marriages, Dad. Each one to the daughter of someone he targeted for acquisition. Each lasting exactly 18 months before a quiet divorce and complete corporate absorption. "I'm number 4. "I know," Paul whispered. "God help me, I know. But Alice, what else can I do? If I refuse his offer, we lose everything in 60 days. The creditors have already filed preliminary foreclosure proceedings. Your mother's entire life's work, gone. At least this way, the firm survives. At least her vision continues, even if I'm collateral damage?" Paul flinched as if she'd struck him. "You're my daughter. My only child. I would rather die than see you hurt. But I'm already losing this battle, Alice. I'm losing to debt and grief and time, and David Ashford is offering us a lifeline. Maybe it's a rope, maybe it's a noose. I honestly can't tell anymore. All I know is that if you don't take it, we both drown." Alice stood and walked to the wall of photographs, finding her favorite, her mother at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for their first affordable housing project, radiant with purpose and joy. Maya Chen had believed architecture could change lives, that thoughtful design could lift communities out of poverty and isolation. She'd spent her career proving it, one project at a time. What would she want Alice to do? The answer came clearly: fight. Maya Chen had never backed down from a challenge, never let profit-driven developers steamroll her vision. She'd found creative solutions, built unexpected coalitions, turned limitations into opportunities. She'd beaten David Ashford once. Why couldn't her daughter do it again? "I'll do it," Alice said, turning back to her father. "I'll marry him. But on one condition." Paul looked up, hope and fear warring in his expression. "What condition?" "I want full access to the firm's operations. Not as your daughter, as a partner. I want to understand every contract, every project, every financial arrangement David proposes. If I'm going to be his wife, I'm going to be an active participant in whatever he's planning, not a decorative asset to trot out at charity galas." "Alice, that's non-negotiable. If I'm sacrificing my life, I'm not doing it blindly. Either I'm a full partner in this merger, or I walk and we both face the consequences." She watched her father process this, saw the moment he realized she meant it. Paul Chen had raised a daughter who inherited her mother's steel spine, even if he'd forgotten that in his desperation. "I'll tell David," he said finally. "But Alice, you need to understand he's not going to make this easy. Whatever you're planning, whatever strategy you think you have, he's 10 steps ahead. He's always 10 steps ahead." Alice smiled without humor. "Then I'd better start running." Alice's bedroom felt smaller than usual, the walls pressing in as she sat cross-legged on her bed, laptop balanced on her knees. It was past midnight, but sleep was impossible. In 6 weeks, this room would be a memory. She'd be living in whatever sterile penthouse David Ashford called home, playing the role of devoted wife in whatever twisted performance he'd scripted. But first, she needed to understand who she was really marrying. The basic facts she already knew: David Ashford, 36, CEO of Ashford Development Group, one of Southeast Asia's most powerful real estate developers. Net worth somewhere north of $2 billion. Self-made, according to the business profiles, though Alice was skeptical of that claim, nobody built that kind of empire without stepping on throats along the way. What she needed were the details those glowing profiles left out. She started with the ex-wives. Wife number 1, Sarah Nakamura, daughter of Hiroshi Nakamura, owner of Nakamura Properties. They'd married when David was 27 and Sarah was 23. 18 months later, Alice noted the precision. They divorced. 6 months after that, Nakamura Properties was fully absorbed into Ashford Development. Hiroshi Nakamura retired to Kyoto. Sarah disappeared from public life entirely. No social media presence, no business ventures, nothing. It was like she'd been erased. Wife number 2, Catherine Wong, daughter of Thomas Wong, founder of Wong and Associates Real Estate. Married David at 25. Divorced at 26 and a half. Wong and Associates became a subsidiary of Ashford Development. Thomas Wong died of a heart attack 3 months after the merger was finalized. Catherine moved to London, worked as a junior analyst at a no-name firm. The daughter of a real estate mogul, reduced to entry-level work far from home. Wife number 3, Priya Sharma. Alice's chest tightened at the name, thinking of her own best friend Michelle, daughter of Raj Sharma, owner of Sharma Construction. Another 18-month marriage. Another acquisition. But Priya's story had a darker twist. She'd been hospitalized twice during the marriage for what the press called exhaustion. After the divorce, she'd moved to Mumbai, married a doctor within 6 months, and refused all interview requests. The few paparazzi photos Alice found showed a woman who looked haunted, jumping at shadows. The pattern was unmistakable. David Ashford didn't just acquire companies, he acquired women as tools for acquisition, used them up, and discarded them once they'd served their purpose. And he did it with such methodical precision that it had to be intentional, planned from the start. Alice's phone buzzed. Michelle, calling for the 7th time that day. This time Alice answered. Thank God, Michelle breathed. Alice, I've been losing my mind. Your dad's secretary called me, said something about a wedding in 6 weeks? Please tell me it's a joke. It's not a joke. Alice's voice sounded strange to her own ears, flat, defeated. I'm marrying David Ashford. The silence on the other end stretched so long Alice thought the call had dropped. Then, tell me you're running. Tell me you have a bag packed and a flight booked to literally anywhere that isn't here. I can't run. Can't or won't. Does it matter? Alice rubbed her eyes, exhaustion washing over her. The firm is drowning, Michelle. We're 60 days from foreclosure. My father has nothing left. This marriage saves Chen and Associates, saves my mother's legacy. What else can I do? You can choose yourself. Michelle's voice cracked with emotion. Alice, fuck the firm. What about you? What about the girl who used to say architecture should serve people, not profit? What about the woman who told me she'd rather starve than compromise her principles? That girl couldn't save her mother, Alice said quietly. Maybe this one can save her father. Another long silence, then Michelle spoke more gently. I've heard things about David Ashford. Bad things. The way he destroys anyone who gets in his way, the projects he's killed, the people he's ruined. He's not human, Alice. He's a machine designed to extract maximum profit from minimum investment. And you're about to let him own you. He already owns me, Alice corrected. I signed the papers 3 hours ago. This call is just me processing reality. Then unprocess it. Tear up the contract. Let the firm fail. Your mother wouldn't want this for you, you know she wouldn't. But Alice wasn't sure of that. Maya Chen had been pragmatic beneath her idealism, always finding ways to work within systems she couldn't break. Would she have sacrificed her daughter? No. But would she have expected her daughter to be smart enough to find a third option, a way to turn a trap into triumph? Yes. Definitely yes. I need to go, Alice said. But Michelle? Thank you. For caring enough to be angry. After hanging up, Alice returned to her research with new focus. If she was going to be David Ashford's wife, temporarily, she needed to understand not just what he'd done but how he thought. Every successful architect knew that understanding the designer's intent was key to modifying a structure without collapse. The same principle had to apply to deconstructing a marriage designed for corporate acquisition. She pulled up video interviews, watching David speak at business conferences and city planning meetings. He was compelling on camera, tall, dark-haired, sharp-featured, with those unsettling ice blue eyes that seemed to calculate the worth of everything they observed. He spoke with absolute confidence, no hedging or uncertainty. His presentations were masterclasses in persuasion, establish credibility, present data, systematically dismantle objections, offer an inevitable conclusion. But there were moments, brief, easy to miss, where something else flickered across his face. When an interviewer asked about his parents, his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. When someone mentioned legacy projects, his eyes went distant for half a second before refocusing with laser intensity. Alice rewound, watched again. Yes, there was something there. Pain, maybe. Or anger. Emotion buried so deep most people would never see it, but Alice had spent her life learning to observe structural weaknesses. And David Ashford, for all his calculated perfection, had cracks in his foundation. She just needed to figure out how to widen them. At 3 a.m., Alice found what she'd been looking for, an article from 15 years ago, buried in the business section of an Australian newspaper. Ashford Properties declares bankruptcy, founder's son vows to rebuild empire. Alice sat up straighter, pulse quickening. David's father had owned a development company? She clicked through to the full article. Melbourne-based Ashford Properties filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy yesterday after a series of failed investments and alleged mismanagement by founder Robert Ashford. The collapse affects over 200 employees and numerous contractors. Robert Ashford, 58, declined to comment. His son, David Ashford, 21, released a brief statement. My father's mistakes will not define this family's legacy. I will rebuild what was lost and ensure it never happens again. Alice's mind raced. David Ashford wasn't just driven by profit, he was driven by redemption. His father had failed catastrophically, and David had spent 15 years systematically building the opposite, an empire so successful, so untouchable, that nobody could ever call him a failure like they'd called his father. That explained the ruthlessness, the precision, the need for absolute control. David wasn't just building wealth, he was building fortress walls around himself, ensuring he'd never experience the humiliation and loss his father had inflicted on their family. And that gave Alice something she desperately needed: leverage. If David's driving force was preventing his father's failure from recurring, then the key to managing their arrangement wasn't fighting his control, it was showing him that her approach could strengthen, not threaten, what he'd built. Maya Chen had beaten him once by proving her community center enhanced property values. Alice could do the same, position herself not as opposition, but as a valuable asset he couldn't afford to discard. She opened a new document and started typing, outlining a strategy. 1. Learn his business inside out, become indispensable 2. Identify projects where community-focused design increases profitability 3. Build relationships with his clients and partners independently 4. Create value he can't replace after 18 months 5. Find his weaknesses before he finds mine. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Alice saved the document, closed her laptop, and finally let herself feel the full weight of what she'd agreed to. In 6 weeks, she would marry a man who viewed her as property. In 18 months, he would try to discard her like his previous wives. Between now and then, she had to transform herself from victim to player, asset to partner. No pressure. Alice lay back on her bed, staring at the ceiling where she'd stuck glow-in-the-dark stars when she was 8 years old. Her mother had helped her arrange them in actual constellations, teaching her that, even in darkness, patterns existed. Structure existed. If you understood the underlying framework, you could navigate anything. I hope you're right, Mom, Alice whispered to the stars. Because I'm about to enter the darkest navigation of my life. Somewhere across the city, in his obsidian tower, David Ashford was probably still awake, moving pieces on his chessboard. He thought he'd acquired just another convenient pawn. He had no idea Alice Chen was learning to play. The chapel David Ashford had selected for their wedding was, unsurprisingly, his own property. Alice learned this detail from his assistant, Jude, who handled all the arrangements with the efficiency of someone organizing a corporate merger rather than a marriage. Mr. Ashford acquired the building 3 years ago, Jude explained during their one and only wedding planning meeting. He was in his mid-30s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of bland handsomeness that made him instantly forgettable. It's primarily used for executive events and private functions. He thought it would suit your needs. Her needs. As if Alice had any say in this performance. The chapel was pure David Ashford, minimalist to the point of sterility, all clean lines and expensive materials. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the harbor, offering panoramic views of the shipping lanes and luxury yachts. The space felt more like a corporate boardroom than a sacred place, which, Alice supposed, was appropriate. This wasn't a wedding. It was a contract signing with witnesses. Now, standing in the small preparation room adjacent to the main chapel, Alice stared at her reflection and barely recognized herself. The wedding dress was beautiful, she had to give Jude credit for that. Simple white silk, elegant lines, a design that would photograph well without drawing focus from David. Because of course this wedding was really about him, about the image he wanted to project to his business associates and clients. Michelle knocked and entered without waiting for permission, her expression fierce. You look beautiful. And miserable. Please tell me you're going to bolt. I'm not bolting. Alice adjusted the simple platinum necklace, something borrowed from Michelle's mother. My father's out there. I can't humiliate him like that. He's humiliating you, Bael. He's drowning, Michelle. I'm the life raft. Shitty metaphor, but accurate. Michelle moved behind Alice, meeting her eyes in the mirror. You're the strongest person I know. If anyone can survive David Ashford, it's you. But Alice, survival isn't the same as living. Don't forget that. A gentle knock interrupted them. Jude, impeccably punctual as always. Miss Chen, we're ready when you are. Your father is waiting to escort you. I'm walking alone, Alice cut him off. It was her one rebellion, the single detail she'd insisted on despite Jude's polite confusion. If she was entering this trap willingly, she'd do it on her own terms, even if those terms were vanishingly small. Jude's expression flickered surprise, maybe respect, before smoothing back to professional blandness. Of course. I'll inform the officiant. When he left, Michelle squeezed Alice's shoulders. I'll be right there. Front row, bride's side, making faces at all those corporate sharks on David's side. If you need to run, just give me the signal. What signal? I don't know, scream, probably. Anything louder than I do. Despite everything, Alice smiled. Thank you. For being here. For not giving up on me. Someone has to remember who you were before this. Make sure you come back to her when it's over. The chapel doors opened to reveal 70 guests, all of them David's associates, clients, and business partners. They filled the stark white chairs with the enthusiasm of people attending a mandatory corporate function, which this essentially was. Expensive suits, designer dresses, faces Alice had seen in business sections and society pages. People who mattered to David Ashford's empire. On the bride's side, her father sat alone. Paul Chen looked smaller than Alice had ever seen him, hunched in a chair that seemed too large, too empty. The weight of what he'd agreed to showed in every line of his face. When their eyes met, he attempted a smile that broke Alice's heart more than any tears could have. She'd wanted to invite Mari from the community center, some of her colleagues from the firm, and friends from university. But David's assistant had gently explained that the guest list was curated for optimal strategic value. Translation: this wedding was a business opportunity for David to strengthen relationships with key players in his industry. Alice's people didn't fit that agenda. So she walked alone down an aisle lined with strangers, toward a man who'd calculated this day with the same precision he applied to hostile takeovers. David waited at the altar, devastatingly handsome in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. His dark hair was perfect, every strand in place. His posture spoke of absolute confidence, of a man who'd never questioned his right to occupy any space. Those ice-blue eyes tracked her approach with an intensity that made Alice's breath catch despite her determination to remain unmoved. She searched his face for something, anything human. Nervousness. Anticipation. Even cold satisfaction at securing his newest acquisition. But David's expression was as unreadable as the first time she'd met him, a mask of control so complete it could have been carved from marble. The officiant was another stranger, hired specifically for this event. He delivered the opening remarks with professional warmth that rang hollow in the sterile space. Alice barely heard the words, focusing instead on breathing, on maintaining composure, on not looking at her father's devastated face or Michelle's furious one. Do you, David Ashford, take Alice Chen to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. David's voice was steady, practiced. He'd done this 3 times before, after all. He knew his lines. And do you, Alice Chen, take David Ashford to be your lawfully wedded husband? This was it. Last chance to run, to choose herself over duty, to let the firm collapse and build something new from the rubble. Last chance to be the woman who prioritized principle over pragmatism. Alice thought of her mother's community center, of the teenagers learning design there, of all the projects that would die if Chen and associates folded. She thought of her father's trembling hands and the legacy he'd promised to protect. She thought of David's 3 previous wives, erased or broken or hidden away, and made herself a silent promise. I won't be like them. I do, Alice said, loud enough to carry to the back row where Michelle sat radiating disapproval. David produced a ring, platinum, simple, elegant, chosen by someone on his staff who'd never met her. He took her hand, and Alice was startled by the warmth of his fingers. She'd expected him to be as cold as his demeanor, but his touch was human, alive, real. It was the first indication that David Ashford was flesh and blood beneath the corporate armor, and somehow that made everything worse. He slid the ring onto her finger with practiced smoothness. With this ring, I'm wed. The platinum band felt heavy foreign. Alice accepted David's ring from the officiant, matching his, of course, part of a set, and reached for his hand. Their eyes met, and for a brief second, something flickered in David's gaze. Too quick to identify, Too dangerous to hope it meant anything beyond calculated performance. "With this ring I thee wed," Alice repeated, sliding the band onto his finger. She wondered if he felt the same wrongness she did, the sense of binding herself to a stranger for all the wrong reasons. "By the power vested in me by the state of Singapore, I now pronounce you husband and wife." The officiant smiled with professional warmth. "You may kiss the bride." David's hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone in a gesture that would photograph beautifully. His eyes held hers for a long moment, and Alice saw something there: assessment, calculation, ownership. Then he leaned in and kissed her with all the passion of a man signing a contract. His lips were warm but clinical, the kiss lasting exactly long enough to satisfy convention without suggesting actual emotion. When he pulled back, his hand lingered on her face for just a moment. For the cameras, Alice reminded herself, before he stepped away and offered his arm. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, and the name felt like a cage door slamming shut. They walked back down the aisle together, his hand resting possessively on hers. The guests applauded with the enthusiasm of stockholders approving a favorable merger. Alice kept her smile fixed, her spine straight, playing the role of radiant bride even as everything inside her screamed to run. At the reception, held in the same building, naturally, in a banquet hall David also owned, Alice moved through conversations like a ghost. Business associates congratulated David on his excellent match, while barely looking at her. Clients discussed upcoming projects over champagne that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her father sat at a corner table, nursing a single glass of wine and looking like he'd aged another decade. Michelle appeared at Alice's elbow during a rare moment alone. "How are you holding up?" "I'm married to a man who kissed me like he was testing the structural integrity of a building." Alice drained her champagne. "How do you think I'm holding up?" "At least you haven't cried yet." "That's something. I'm saving that for later. When I'm alone in whatever sterile penthouse he's taking me to." "About that." Michelle's expression turned serious. "I did some asking around. Through my firm's connections." "Alice, David's penthouse isn't just sterile, it's a fortress. Biometric security, cameras everywhere, staff who report directly to him. Once you're in there, you're isolated. Cut off from everyone who cares about you." Alice felt ice settle in her stomach. "That's the point, isn't it? That's what he did to the others. Isolate them, control them, use them up. So don't let him." Michelle gripped her arm. "I'm going to text you every single day. If you don't respond within 12 hours, I'm calling the police, your father, and every news outlet in Singapore. I don't care if it embarrasses him or ruins his precious reputation. You're not disappearing like the others." Before Alice could respond, Jude appeared with his trademark efficient smile. "Mrs. Ashford, Mr. Ashford would like to begin the first dance." "If you're ready." "No," Alice wanted to say. "I'll never be ready." But she nodded and let Jude guide her to the center of the room where David waited, hand extended. The music started, something classical and expensive sounding that Alice didn't recognize. David pulled her into frame with the confidence of someone who'd taken ballroom dancing lessons, or perhaps just done this 3 times before. His hand settled on her waist, warm through the silk of her dress. "You performed well today," he said quietly as they moved across the floor. "Better than I expected." "Performed?" Alice met his eyes. "That's what this is to you. A performance. Everything is a performance, Alice. Business, relationships, social interactions, all of it requires playing specific roles to achieve desired outcomes." His gaze was steady, analytical. "You played the role of reluctant but dutiful bride convincingly. My associates are satisfied that this alliance has merit beyond mere finance." "How wonderful for you. It should be wonderful for you as well. Your father's firm is solvent as of this morning. I transferred the necessary funds to cover all outstanding debts and provide operating capital for the next 18 months. Chen and Associates will not only survive, it will thrive under our combined resources." 18 months. There it was, confirmation that David had already calculated the exact lifespan of their marriage. "And after 18 months?" Alice asked. "When you're done with me like you were done with Sarah and Catherine and Priya?" David's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, surprised that she'd done her research, perhaps. After 18 months, we'll reassess based on whether our arrangement continues to provide mutual value. If it does, we extend. If not, we dissolve the marriage amicably and both move forward with strengthened positions. Strengthened positions, Alice repeated. Is that what you call it when you absorb someone's family business and discard their daughter? I call it business, Alice. Nothing more, nothing less. David spun her with practiced ease. But I'll tell you what I told the others. Make yourself valuable enough, and there's no reason our arrangement needs to end. The timeline is flexible for those who prove their worth. And how exactly do I prove my worth to you, David? By being decorative? By not causing problems? By quietly accepting whatever you decide. For the first time since she'd met him, David smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. It was devastatingly attractive and utterly terrifying because it suggested he was genuinely amused by her defiance. No, he said softly. You prove your worth by being exactly what you are: intelligent, principled, and stubborn enough to challenge me when I'm wrong. I have enough people who agree with everything I say. What I need is someone who can see angles I miss, who understands community dynamics in ways I never will, who can turn my profit-driven projects into something that actually matters to people. Alice stumbled slightly, caught off guard. David steadied her with ease. That's why I chose you, he continued. Not just because acquiring Chen and Associates made strategic sense, but because you're Maya Chen's daughter. Your mother was the only person who ever beat me at the negotiating table. She saw possibilities I didn't, created value where I only saw costs. I need that perspective. I need someone who can do what she did, make me better at what I do. So I'm supposed to be grateful? Alice's voice was sharp despite her confusion. You manipulated my family into financial ruin, forced me into this marriage, and I should thank you for recognizing my potential? I didn't force anything. I presented an option. You chose to accept it. The song was ending, their dance slowing. But Alice, understand this. I don't need a victim. I don't want someone who resents me and counts down days until our divorce. I want a partner, someone who can stand beside me and build something neither of us could create alone. The question is whether you're capable of seeing past your anger long enough to recognize the opportunity I'm offering. The music stopped. David stepped back, releasing her, and the loss of his warmth made Alice shiver despite the room's comfortable temperature. Think about it, he said. We have 18 months minimum. You can spend them being miserable and passive, waiting to be discarded like you think I'll discard you. Or you can spend them proving that you're the one person I can't afford to lose. He walked away then, returning to a cluster of business associates who immediately absorbed his attention. Alice stood alone in the center of the dance floor, her mind reeling. David Ashford had just offered her something she hadn't expected: agency. Not freedom, she was still trapped in this arrangement, but the possibility of transforming her cage into a platform. If she was smart enough. If she was strong enough. If she could beat him at his own game the way her mother once had. Michelle appeared at her side again. What did he say to you? You look like you've seen a ghost. Not a ghost, Alice murmured, watching David across the room. He was laughing at something a client said, completely at ease, as if he hadn't just turned her entire understanding of their arrangement upside down. A challenge. Alice. He thinks I'll either break like the others or prove valuable enough to keep. He's giving me 18 months to make myself indispensable. Alice turned to Michelle, and for the first time since agreeing to this marriage, she felt something other than despair. He has no idea what I'm capable of. That's the spirit, Michelle said cautiously. But Alice, be careful. David Ashford is offering you a longer leash, not freedom. Don't confuse the two. I won't, Alice promised. But as she watched her new husband work the room with practiced charm, she was already planning. Already seeing angles and opportunities David might not expect. He wanted her to be valuable? She'd become essential. He wanted a partner who could challenge him? She'd become a force he couldn't ignore. He wanted to use her the way he'd used the others? She'd figure out how to use him right back. The wedding reception continued around her, champagne flowing, deals being made, David Ashford's empire expanding with every handshake. But Alice Chen, no, Alice Ashford now was no longer just a victim in someone else's story. She was a player. And the game had just begun. David's penthouse occupied the entire top floor of Ashford Tower, naturally. The private elevator opened directly into the foyer, which was larger than Alice's childhood bedroom and just as impersonal as she'd feared. Glass, steel, white marble. Expensive abstract art on the walls that probably cost more than most cars. Furniture that looked designed by someone who'd never actually sat down. "Welcome home," David said, his tone suggesting this was just another item to check off his wedding day itinerary. Home. The word was laughable. This place was a showroom, a monument to wealth and taste with all the warmth of a bank vault. Jude had materialized somehow. Alice hadn't even seen him enter, carrying her 2 suitcases. Everything she'd been permitted to bring from her old life, fitting into 2 bags. The rest of her belongings were being stored until she needed them, which was David's polite way of saying he'd decided what she was allowed to keep. "Your room is the second door on the left," David said, already loosening his tie and heading toward what Alice assumed was the master bedroom. "Jude will show you. We have an early meeting tomorrow at Chen and Associates to discuss the integration plan, so I suggest you get some rest." "My room?" Alice repeated. "We're not. Sharing a bedroom?" "No." David paused, glancing back at her. "I have no interest in a wife who's being coerced into intimacy. Our arrangement is professional, Alice. The marriage is legal necessity for the merger. Nothing more." He disappeared into the master suite before Alice could respond, leaving her standing in the cold foyer with Jude and her pathetic 2 suitcases. "This way, Mrs. Ashford," Jude said gently, picking up her bags. The guest room, because that's what it was, a guest room in her own supposed home, was beautiful and soulless. King-size bed with hotel white linens. Minimalist furniture in pale wood. An ensuite bathroom with marble and chrome. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stunning view of the harbor. Everything perfect, everything expensive, everything completely devoid of personality. "Mr. Ashford had your room prepared based on your preferences," Jude said, setting down her suitcases. "If anything doesn't meet your needs, please let me know and I'll arrange changes immediately." "My preferences?" Alice looked around the sterile space. "He doesn't know my preferences. He's never asked. He reviewed your apartment extensively. Color schemes, furniture styles, book collections. This room was designed to reflect what he observed about your tastes while maintaining the penthouse's overall aesthetic." The casual mention of surveillance made Alice's skin crawl. "He had someone photograph my apartment?" "Mr. Ashford believes in thorough preparation." Jude's expression remained professionally neutral. "Is there anything else you need this evening?" "Yes," Alice wanted to scream. "I need to not be here. I need to go back 24 hours and make different choices. I need my mother to still be alive so none of this ever had to happen." "No," she said instead. "Thank you, Jude." When he left, Alice sank onto the edge of the bed, still wearing her wedding dress, and finally let herself feel the full weight of what had just happened. She was married, living in a fortress, cut off from everything familiar, sharing space with a man who viewed her as a business asset and had surveyed her home to design her prison. Her phone buzzed. "Michelle, right on schedule. First check-in. Respond within 12 hours or I'm calling the cavalry. How are you holding up?" Alice typed back, "I'm in a beautiful cage. But I'm alive and thinking. Don't worry yet." "Yet?" That's not reassuring. Nothing about this is reassuring. But I meant what I said at the reception. I'm going to make this work somehow. Be careful. And remember, you're not alone. I'm here. Alice set down her phone and forced herself to stand. The wedding dress suddenly felt suffocating, too tight, too white, too symbolic of everything wrong with her situation. She stripped it off, leaving the expensive silk pool on the floor, and stood in her undergarments, staring at her reflection in the full-length mirror. Who was she now? Alice Chen was gone, absorbed into Alice Ashford. But she refused to disappear like Sarah and Catherine and Priya. She refused to let David Ashford erase her the way he'd erased them. She pulled on jeans and a t-shirt from her suitcase, her clothes, her choices, her small act of defiance, and went exploring. The penthouse was enormous, easily 5,000 square feet of pristine, soulless luxury. Living room with city views. Dining room that could seat 12. Kitchen with restaurant-grade appliances that looked unused. Home office with multiple monitors and a desk that probably cost more than Alice's car. Home gym. Media room. And everywhere, subtle security cameras tucked into corners, watching everything. David's bedroom door was closed, light visible underneath. Alice could hear him on a phone call, business, naturally, even at nearly midnight on his wedding night. She found herself drawn to the windows, pressing her forehead against the cool glass and looking down at the city's 72 floors below. Somewhere down there was her father's firm, her mother's community center, Michelle probably still awake and worried. Real life, happening without her. Can't sleep. Alice spun to find David standing in the hallway, barefoot and casual in worn jeans and a t-shirt. It was the first time she'd seen him in anything other than a perfect suit, and the contrast was startling. He looked younger, more human. Almost approachable. Adjusting, Alice said carefully. It's a lot to process. David moved to stand beside her at the window, keeping a careful distance between them. I know this isn't what you wanted. But for what it's worth, I'll try to make it bearable. Bearable, Alice repeated. That's the goal? Not comfortable or happy, just bearable. I don't believe in false promises. This arrangement serves specific purposes for both of us. Pretending it's anything more would be dishonest. He gazed out at the city. But I meant what I said earlier. I don't want you to be miserable, Alice. That serves neither of us. Then give me something, Alice said, surprising herself with her boldness. Give me one thing that makes this bearable. David turned to look at her, those ice blue eyes assessing. What do you want? Access. Real access, not just token involvement. I want to be at every meeting about Chen and Associates. I want to review every project Ashford Development proposes. I want a real role, not just a title. She held his gaze. You said you need someone who can see angles you miss. Let me prove I can do that. For a long moment, David said nothing, just studied her with that unnerving intensity. Then, slowly, he nodded. Agreed. You'll have full access to all relevant business operations. Jude will add you to calendars and distribution lists. You'll attend meetings, review proposals, and provide input. He paused. But Alice, understand that access comes with expectations. I don't tolerate incompetence or laziness. If you want to be involved, you need to be prepared, informed, and valuable. Can you handle that? Yes, Alice said without hesitation. This was what she'd wanted, a way in, an opportunity to understand his empire well enough to navigate it. I can handle it. Good. David moved toward his bedroom, then paused. One more thing. The cameras. Alice's stomach dropped. What about them? They're in common areas, only living room, kitchen, entryways. Not in bedrooms or bathrooms. I value privacy as much as security. He met her eyes. I want you to feel safe here, not surveilled. The cameras are for protection, not control. It was such a small concession, but somehow it mattered. David Ashford was establishing boundaries, showing that even in his fortress, certain spaces were hers alone. Thank you, Alice said quietly. After he disappeared into his room, Alice returned to hers and finally allowed herself to cry. Silent tears that soaked her pillow as she processed everything: the wedding, the kiss, the fortress, David's unexpected gestures toward humanity. She was trapped, but she had agency. She was isolated, but she had Michelle. She was married to a man who terrified her, but he'd just given her exactly what she needed to fight back. Tomorrow, the real work will begin. Tomorrow, she'd start proving that Alice Chen, Alice Ashford, was not like the others. That she couldn't be used up and discarded. Tomorrow, she'd start building her own empire within him. But tonight, alone in a beautiful cage, she let herself mourn the life she'd lost and the woman she used to be. Alice woke at 5:30 a.m. to find a schedule from Jude already on her phone. Breakfast at 6:15. Departure for Chen and Associates at 7 o'clock, integration planning meeting at 8 o'clock. Her new life, organized down to the minute. She dressed carefully in a tailored navy suit, armor for the battlefield. When she emerged from her room, she found David already in the kitchen, reviewing documents on his tablet while drinking espresso from a cup so small it looked absurd in his large hands. "Morning," he said without looking up. "There's coffee." And Jude arranged breakfast. The breakfast in question was beautifully plated fresh fruit, Greek yogurt, artisan bread. Prepared by someone somewhere, delivered like magic. Alice wondered if David ever actually cooked, or if he'd spent so long being served that he'd forgotten how. "We'll need to discuss strategy before the meeting," David continued, still focused on his tablet. "Your father's team is talented but undisciplined. Projects run over budget and past deadlines consistently. That changes now. My father's team prioritizes quality over speed," Alice countered, pouring coffee. "They take time because they care about getting it right. They take time because they lack proper project management systems, which we'll implement starting today." David finally looked up, his gaze sharp. "This is exactly why I need your input, Alice. I see inefficiency. You see different priorities. Together, we find solutions that serve both. Or you just steamroll everyone with your systems and destroy what makes Chen and Associates special in the first place. That's certainly a risk. Which is why you're coming to this meeting, to make sure I don't." He stood, collecting his briefcase. "Let's go. We're expected in 30 minutes. The drive to Chen and Associates was silent, David reviewing documents while Alice stared out the window of his town car. Naturally, he had a driver, and tried to calm her racing heart. This was it. Her first real test. She needed to show both her father's team and David that she could bridge the gap between them, that she brought value neither side could achieve alone. Chen and Associates occupied a historic building in Chinatown, 4 stories of restored colonial architecture that Maya Chen had personally renovated. The firm's offices were everything David's penthouse wasn't: warm, cluttered, alive with personality. Architectural models crowded every surface. Design sketches covered the walls. The smell of coffee and paper and creative work filled the air. Alice's father waited in the lobby, looking older than he had at the wedding. Paul Chen's smile was strained as he shook David's hand, then pulled Alice into a brief embrace. "How are you holding up?" he whispered. "Ask me after this meeting," she whispered back. The conference room was packed. Alice's father's entire senior team, 6 architects and designers she'd known for years, sat around the table, expressions ranging from curious to hostile. They knew what this meeting represented: the beginning of David Ashford's takeover.
If you enjoy watching this, please like and subscribe, and I will see you on the next one.